Hi, I'm Bob the Mortgage Coach Mitchell, and we're going to be doing another content video today. This is going to be on how much money you need to buy a house. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that there's a lot of misinformation out there on how much it costs to buy a house. There are folks like that guy Dave Ramsey, the financial guru guy. He'll recommend that you wait until you can pay cash for the house. Well, I think that's absolutely ridiculous, because by the time you come up with the money to pay cash for the house will be worth so much more that you really, that you still won't be able to pay cash for it. So, it's a moving target, so it's going to run away from you faster than what you can save up to pay cash down. So, if you have the money, I mean, there's an argument to be made for it, but also there's an argument to be made for still going ahead and getting a mortgage and taking the money that you would have paid cash and stashing in some investments. That's actually going to be a subject of another video in the future. But for right now, suffice it to say, you don't have to pay cash for most houses. Okay. Now, you are going to also have, there's the down payment of 20% down. That's another magic number. Anytime that you put in excess of 20% down, you don't have to pay for what they call private mortgage insurance, at least if you go conventional. There are some times when you can put more than 20% down, like on an FHA, if you have particularly poor credit, that sort of thing. That might be a way of getting around the approval process, is by putting more into it, even though you don't have to. On an FHA, if you do that, you're still going to have mortgage insurance premium, MIP. So anyway, but basically at 20% down, you do away with mortgage insurance, and that's generally worth it to do if you can. All right. Mortgage insurance gets more expensive the less you put into the deal. So if you're going with an 85% loan to value, that's going to be more expensive than an 89%, which is going to be less expensive than a 5% down. So anyway, I'm not sure if I got that right or not, but basically mortgage insurance gets more expensive the less money you put into the deal. So anyway, so now to answer the question, there are some programs out there such as USDA and VA where you don't have to put any down payment down. All right, so now down payment is, so if you're a veteran, there are actually some other like diplomatic corps veterans, and there's some other things that, Coast Guard, I think, can become eligible for VA. But if you're eligible for VA, that's a wonderful program. The mortgage insurance is pretty reasonable. VA actually does look out for the borrower. So I'm actually a big fan of VA, but you have to be eligible. If you're not eligible for that, you can buy a house USDA with 0% down. Now that's going to be subject to income limits. Okay, and it's also going to be a thing where the house is going to have to be located in at least a semi-rural area. Each individual property shows up on a map that tells you whether it's eligible or not eligible. I actually did a loan for a property a few years back where, even though it was USDA eligible, it was like a spit and a throw right down the road from a large shopping center with a Round Robin and Fuddruckers and all the other amenities that go with shopping centers. So anyway, USDA is another option, but remember that you do have to reach the income guidelines, and they're very convoluted. Consider USDA to be FHA's dysfunctional country cousin. But all right, so you got down payment on those two particular programs. You don't have to put any down payment into the deal. Okay, now you're still going to have two other categories of costs. One's going to be called closing costs, and the other is going to be called prepaids. Closing costs are costs that you incur in buying the house. Okay, if you did buy the house, you wouldn't have to pay for an appraisal, you wouldn't have to pay for title insurance, that sort of thing. Prepaids are costs that you incur in owning the house, but that you have to prepay on the day of closing or by the day of closing in order to get off to an even start with the purchase of the house. All right, now, most loan programs will allow the seller to pay up to X% towards your closing cost and prepaids. On FHA, it's, I believe, 6% on FHA. On a max LTV, like a 97% loan to value, and conventional, I believe it's 3%. Here in the North Carolina market where I'm at, generally speaking, 3%, unless you're on a really small loan, but if you're in a decent sized loan, anything $200,000, $300,000, the 3% is a seller concession where you ask the seller to pay for your closing cost and prepaids. That way, you don't have to pay for it, come up with it out of your pocket. In essence, what you're doing is you're financing it over 30 years. I'll give you a real quick example. Say that let's use round numbers. Let's say that you agree to buy the house for $100,000 and the seller agrees, that they'll sell it to you $100,000. But now you need that 3% to go towards your closing cost and prepaids. So you might come in and say, hey, tell you what, instead of giving you $100,000 for the house, I'm going to give you $103,000 for the house, but I want you to pay my closing costs and prepaids to the tune of $3,000. As far as the seller goes, they're netting out the same. So as far as they're concerned, they shouldn't really care. Okay, what it does for you is it means you don't have to come up with the money out of your pocket. All right, you're in essence financing it over 30 years. Okay, again, you don't have to come up with it out of your pocket. Now, you are going to have to front certain items. I call these items wiggle room money. Okay, for example, when you go into and you sit down with the real estate agent and you go to write the contract on the property, the first thing out of your real estate agent's mouth is going to be break out your checkbook. I need you to cut me a check for a thing called earnest money. Now, in North Carolina, we also have a thing called due diligence, which is a lot like earnest money. They're both deposits on the contract. Earnest money is more heavily regulated than due diligence. Therefore, it's a little bit safer to put your money in earnest money. But that's something you need to talk to your real estate agent about. But regardless, one way or the other, you're going to have to put down earnest money and due diligence. So let's say that that's $500 on each. So you got $1,000 in total deposits on the contract. Now, once you get the contract negotiated and you come to me and you say, hey, Bob, I'm ready to go. I got my house under contract. And you know what the first thing out of my mouth is going to be? Break out your checkbook, because you're going to need to pay for the appraisal and the credit report. Okay, now the appraisals can vary a little bit, but you can pay anywhere from $600 to $1,000. In some markets, it's even more expensive. Okay, that is a closing cost. So if you're getting a credit from the seller, that deed can be applied. That credit can be applied towards that, but you have to front the money. At closing, there will be an adjustment, and you'll get credited that money back. It is indeed possible to walk out of closing with the keys to the house as well as a check for buying a house. So it's a wonderful country. Hey, anyway, so in theory, you can get into a house with absolutely nothing out of your pocket by having the seller pay the closing costs and prepaids. The reality of it is that you're going to have to front some of that money. Generally speaking, if you got $3,000 to $5,000 to work with, I think there's a real good chance that we can finagle you into a house. Okay, now you are going to have to pay mortgage insurance. You are going to have a cooperative seller. Okay, and the seller's going to be concerned with where they net out at, so it's going to be part of the negotiations. But know that it is possible. You are going to need the wiggle room money. That's the money for the appraisal, the credit report. A building inspection is something that you're not required by the contract, but is a darn good idea, as well as your earnest money and due diligence. So as long as you can come up with that money, again, probably $3,000 to $5,000, which might sound like a lot, but if you start working on it now, there's a real good chance that within a year or two, you can come up with that kind of money. So the next thing we're going to talk about is savings formation. But for right now, just suffice it to say that if you can come up with $3,000 to $5,000 and you have halfway decent credit and a desire to buy a house, Bob, the mortgage coach, can indeed put you into a house. So now let's do it, okay? Let's put you into a house. Bye-bye.